Sounds great.
I'm admitting people right now, and I'm going to switch host over to Seth. Seth is our tech man. We have been learning a lot about Zoom. Oh, hold up. I can hear myself from the other monitor because it's live and it's freaking me out. All right. Host is switched. All right, everyone, we're starting this one 1 minute late. Sorry about that. We have had people rolling in, like it seems like sometime even as much as 5 to 10 minutes late. So I'm going to make a few announcements as they come in, and then we will get started. Those announcements, if you've been to several of these sessions, will be repetitive to you. But if you're brand new, thank you for just listening to some housekeeping stuff for a minute. This is in Zoom meeting. So we have a chat, and we encourage you as you enter to tell us who you are, where you're from, maybe drop a link to your newsletter. Seth is going to be dropping some links in rapid fire pace really quickly. We have a Slack community for this event that we hope lives on long after the event, and it is connecting newsletter creators. So you can go in there and drop an introduction, a link to your latest newsletter, a lot of different channels going on in there, including newsletter resources from some of our speakers that are happening. Also, we have 2 contests going on during Newsletter Fest. The first is to win a free year of Curated, and it's super easy to enter. You just go and start an account and then create a mock-up of a newsletter and push that to the contest. So he's putting the link to the contest in there. You should also go in and look at that, even if you're not entering, to vote on some people. I think we only have 1 entry so far, but I need to go back and look. The voting closes Thursday at midnight. So you actually, if you enter, have a pretty good chance at this point. The other contest that we have going on is we crowdsourced submissions for nominees for favorite newsletters of 2021 in some different categories. So those are all able to be found at the link Seth just dropped, and you can go vote for your favorites. You can actually vote like once a day. So go in there and vote up your favorites. We're excited to announce those at Friday's closing ceremony. So without much further from me, we're going to hand it over to Michael Aft of The New Paper. It's a paid newsletter. Is that the right way to phrase it, I think? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Love their model because it's a sign up and you get a week free, and then you get to decide after that week if you want to continue receiving it or not. And he is going to tell the story of how The New Paper in, 24 months grew to a $1 million business, which I think anyone who's considering a paid newsletter should have their ears perked and tune in to the strategy that they use to get to that point. I'm looking forward to the inspiration you're about to spiel out to all of us.
Thanks so much, Ashley. And Seth, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, but just let me know if there's any issue with what you're seeing on my end.
Oh, and one last thing I should have said is that I'm going to watch the chat. And if we have some questions come in that seem relevant enough to interrupt you for answering, then I will do that. But I will also maybe keep some for the end if they seem like off topic or something. But we have found that conversations that kind of meander based on what you're talking about sometimes get into some very interesting topics. So.
Absolutely. That sounds great to me. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really excited and honored to be part of this newsletter fest, and huge fans of what Ashley and the folks are doing with her team. So, as Ashley mentioned, today, gonna keep it fairly brief, kind of walk you through A, what is the new paper in our story, B, what is the path we took to get where we are, and C, what learnings from building this business over the last couple of years can we share with you to help your own newsletter businesses. So first, our story. So John, my co-founder, and myself started our careers not in the newsletter media industry at all. So we worked together at first in Wall Street in investment banking and private equity. And we actually met working together at LinkedIn. I went and left LinkedIn. I went and got a very useless MBA. And then John went and got an actual helpful skill set working at The Hustle, which is obviously a 1 million+ subscriber email newsletter. And he ran growth there, taking them from a couple 100,000 readers to well over 1 million. And then we started the new paper. And the reason we started the new paper is because the news is broken. John and I felt this shared frustration at LinkedIn that as normal, busy working professionals, we just couldn't find a good way to stay informed in a way that wasn't filled with clickbait and sensationalism and an enormous amount of volume of content and endless feeds and all the things that make the news frustrating. This was all the way back in 2015, but the problem has really only gotten worse. So we decided to step off the sidelines and address it ourselves. The way we do that is by making straightforward, fact-first news extremely easy to consume. And specifically what that actually means is 1, extremely digestible information. So always focusing on ease of use. 2 is convenient delivery, which is kind of where we get into the newsletter space. And 3 is just a truly delightful user experience. I think a lot of media companies in the past have been focused on justifying the business model or justifying the editorial work, as opposed to creating a delightful consumer experience. The current products that we offer are 1, a daily email newsletter. So obviously most relevant to this conversation. The kind of core context of it is fact-first news in as few words as possible. 5 to 10 stories that you need to understand to start your day with no opinions, no sensationalism, no bias. We also offer a daily text message digest, and we've seen a lot of popularity with that. Reason being, text, like email, is an extremely convenient channel to go into, and we're happy to talk through that. With all the decisions that we've made to date, we've been hyper-focused on the user experience, always coming back to our mission of making fact-first news really easy to consume. So where do things stand right now? We spent a couple years building up what we think is an interesting business, but it's been a grind to get here. And before I walk through what we learned, I'll just kind of give you a quick update. So we launched as a free email newsletter, very similar to The Skim or Morning Brew or The Hustle or any of those other larger newsletters that have come before us. That product was ad driven and we reached over 100,000 readers. We were really excited about that. But we also took a step back and asked ourselves, well, what business model really aligns with our mission and our vision for what we're trying to create and the promise that we make to our audience? And so we ended up subsequently pivoting over to 100% recurring subscription revenue. We now have over 12,000 paying subscribers and $1 million of ARR. So we're really proud of what we've built, but we've learned a lot along the way. And so that's kind of the core of what we're going to walk through today. So there's 8 things I'm going to walk you through. I promise that this will be a fairly fast and hopefully useful experience for you. Why don't we just kick off? I'm not going to read this slide to you, and we'll kind of go through these in order, and of course have to answer questions along the way or at the end. So the first thing is clearly defining a problem. I think it's really easy when you're starting a media brand or a content business to start really broad, right? But I think being hyper-focused on the problem you're defining, even if it applies to a broad audience, is super important. When we were raising capital, when we were getting this business off the ground, a lot of the pushback we got was, hey, national news is a really, really big world. It's a really large audience. It's a lot of angles you could cover. You need to be more specific and more focused. And so the more focus that we got on making fact-first news really easy to consume, especially focused on that latter part of ease of consumption, the more clear it became the types of products that we built. And the reason that defining the problem is so important is because that's kind of where everything starts. You can't build your audience, you can't build your products, you can't do anything with your business until you've really clearly articulated that problem. So that was learning number 1. Learning number 2 is need to have trumps nice to have, so much so that I would say if your product is just nice to have, you shouldn't be starting your business. So this is a lesson that I've learned over and over throughout my career, but especially with the new paper. When you're thinking about getting a media business off the ground, you're going to share your idea with a lot of close family, friends, connections, things of that nature. And the reactions that you're going to get a lot of times in your network are going to be, yeah, that seems cool. And that is actually the worst reaction that you get, or the worst reaction that you can get. The reaction that we found when we were initially launching the new paper was, oh my goodness, I need to have this product. And that is the reaction that builds a sustainable business. That's a reaction that you can build a recurrent revenue business off of. That's the reaction where, look, we live in a really competitive world and consumer attention is far and away the hardest thing to acquire. I think there's been some research published that, the average consumer will have maybe 3 paid subscriptions in their lives, and one of them is probably Netflix. So it's hyper competitive. And if you don't have an absolute need to scratch that itch problem, even if it's for a small audience, it'll be really hard to get your business off the ground. And that's true for customer acquisition, customer retention, and monetization. The next piece is audience selection. So who are you actually building this for? And the reason that this is so important is, you would think it's, already taken care of with the problem and making sure it's need to have and kind of defining the scope of what you're building. But understanding and really getting into the head of who you're building your product for becomes critically important because, again, we live in this really hyper competitive world where we're all competing for consumer attention, right? In many ways, that's what created such a challenging media landscape. And so if you aren't hyper focused on the user first, as opposed to the business model or the content, it can be really challenging. And some of the mistakes that we made early on were not necessarily focusing as much as we should have in our kind of initial beta testing. This is over a couple of years now. Really getting into the head of what is the typical user, what is the use case, what is the most value that they're driving for it. And while we've been largely focused on that from day one, we've honed that over time. And the more work we've done in terms of, user surveys, qualitative feedback, chatting with folks who read the new paper, the more we've learned about who the audience actually is. And that has helped us grow. We wouldn't have been able to grow had we not understood fundamentally who our audience is. Now for us, it's still pretty broad, right? It's, the normal user is 18 to 44, living in the US, kind of educated, working professional. We do have folks on both ends of the spectrum and all kinds of demographic spectrum. But at the end of the day, that kind of curiosity, that intellectual curiosity, that desire to have fact first news is really important in terms of the archetype of who reads the new paper. And I'd say it's one of the most important things that you need to understand in order to scale. Next thing is user-first product design. So kind of just covered this a little bit, but when we create new features for the new paper, it's interesting. Anytime that you're starting a business as an entrepreneur or running a newsletter, you're going to have your own hypotheses about what works. And while a lot of times those are going to be right, a lot of times it's not necessarily what your users need or want from the product. And so I think user-first product design, one, starts with talking to people and surveying people. So there's a bunch of surveys that folks use online. I believe the one that we liked was from Superhuman. It's essentially, what do you like? What do you not like? Maybe a measure of NPS. But when you start to survey folks and actually talk to people, you'll get a sense for why they're using your product. And then you can use that information to really double down on that, as opposed to just building new products for the sake of building them. Now, a few good examples of that are, we, for a long time with the new paper, thought, well, we do really, really good short form content, but should we build longer form content? Would it be good if we're doing our own proprietary news? And we thought that was a great idea, longer form stuff, better retention. So we surveyed users and the feedback was pretty overwhelming. People didn't really want it. What people wanted was more of the consistent fact first news that's really easy to consume.
Did Michael drop off? Oh,
Did we lose him?
okay. I think he's back. I just asked him to unmute.
The facial expression that you were paused in was classic. It was like,
Oh, good. That
Yeah.
checked out, of course.
Yeah, you're back.
You're
back with
back.
us.
Awesome.
Go back to sharing. Sorry about that, guys.
That's all
No.
right. No problem.
All right. And Ashley and Seth, let's make sure to post that exact face to YouTube when we.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's there.
That's
it's
the
already
thumbnail.
there. That's it. Yes.
Wonderful. Awesome. So where I think I left things off was user-first product design, but moral of the story there is just always ensure that you are designing products that people actually want within your community and not just things that you think might be a good idea. Let's see, back to present here. Okay. Next thing is choosing your revenue model. So this is something where we've done a little bit of both. And I think you see a lot of folks who are struggling to figure this out right now, because on the one hand, you have the traditional model of using advertising. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the rise of platforms like Substack that are allowing email newsletters and Curated to kind of directly monetize their audiences. And so we've had experience with both. I'm just going to walk through when it makes sense to do either one. So the first one is ads, and that's where we started. And ads are kind of a fickle thing in the newsletter industry. I think what you'll find is that a lot of advertisers, especially DTC brands, are very, very willing to test something once. And so you'll almost get like a false positive where you're selling a bunch of ads. And we'll get to metrics in a second, but you really have to look at retention to understand, is this a sustainable business model? And in a lot of cases, an advertiser might buy 1 or 2 ads, but then they'll just fall off. And the reason for that is there's diminishing returns within newsletters. So the reason that advertisers are spending so much money on Facebook and Instagram and other social channels is because they're reaching billions of people. So there's not really diminishing returns until you're spending at a massive scale. On the other end of the spectrum, when you advertise to a newsletter audience, even if that audience is growing 10, 20% a month, you're going to be hitting the same people over and over again. And it makes it really challenging to see high ROI. So you certainly can get advertisers who are more focused on brand awareness, but it becomes really challenging. So when to actually sell ads, one, you have massive scale. So we reached 100,000 subscribers. We were generating, it was like $30,000, $40,000 a month of ad revenue at that time. And that was good, but advertiser retention wasn't great. And we hadn't reached a scale yet where it made sense for a big brand like a Coke or a P&G or, name your large Fortune 500 company to actually come on board and come on board to do kind of awareness marketing in the same way that they would in other channels. So one, you want to have really massive reach. And then 2, you want to have a really engaged audience. So we actually did a good job here. Our unique open rates were, between 40 and 50%. But you want to make sure that you have a really engaged audience, because if you don't, newsletter CPMs are so high that it'll be really challenging to sell ads when advertisers are super focused on ROI and they're not able to generate that ROI. So again, massive scale, high ROI audience is when it probably makes sense to sell ads. The last piece is, do you have the team in place to do it? Selling ads takes a lot of time. So I launched our entire ad sales business. We were a team of 2. And it's essentially, a full-time job and then some. So you want to make sure that you are well capitalized in terms of the people on your team and the capacity to go sell those ads. So when to choose paid? So we ended up switching to a paid model. And the reason for that, first and foremost, it came back to a user-first experience. Our mission is to overcome sensationalism in the media. We found that ads were in part what created some of the inherent issues in the current news landscape, where more ads kind of incentivizes getting people's eyeballs onto a website. Getting people's eyes onto a website means more clickbait, more sensational content. That kind of creates this vicious cycle where you're always pumping out more content for more ads. So we took a step back and we asked ourselves, look, do we have a good ad business model? Yes, but is it perfectly aligned with the mission we're trying to accomplish and the promise we've made to our users? And when we really asked ourselves, the answer was no. So we made a hard decision to pivot 100% to recurring subscription revenue. The reason that we did that, and the way that we chose to do that, kind of how you should think about this on your end, was 1, again, fit with mission. So should it be a paid product? 2 is willingness to pay. And this is critically important. So we did a bunch of testing of converting existing readers, of acquiring new readers, but all kind of the pieces that go into that, we tested heavily to make sure that there would be a willingness to pay and that the lifetime value of a paid subscriber was high enough to justify the model that we were doing. And then the last piece, it kind of comes back to scale again. Having a newsletter with 12,000 paying subscribers that's growing, 10x year over year, that's been great for us. But a lot of work goes into the content, as everybody on this call knows. And so you want to make sure that you can build enough scale that it's ROI positive for your time to actually make sure that you're kind of running a paid newsletter. There's going to be a lot of folks who get maybe 100, maybe 200 paid subscribers, and that's awesome. But when you're putting hours and hours in every single week, it becomes really challenging to justify. So again, fit with user experience, fit with business model. Is there a willingness to pay among consumers, which is probably the hardest piece to tackle? And then is it going to be ROI positive for your time? So as we built this business, we realized that measurement was absolutely critical. Our belief, and this is something that we took from LinkedIn, is that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And so the measurement tools that we launched were a little bit different for ad sales and paid subscriptions, but I just wanted to kind of quickly walk through them. I'll be available obviously on this call, but afterwards as well, if anybody wants to chat through any of these more specifics. But until we started measuring these things on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis, we didn't really understand what was going on with our business. So on the ad sales side, first thing you need to do is figure out how much you're going to charge. So this is CPM, it's cost per 1,000 impressions. The way that most newsletters will measure this is actually kind of different than your more traditional channels. They'll measure it as cost per 1,000 subscribers. So, it's not necessarily every actual impression. It's just the number of people who are receiving your newsletter. I've seen prices and CPMs as high as $40. I've seen them as low as $5. It's kind of just dependent on your audience and how specific and targeted it is. And then everything else in terms of kind of open rates and fill rates and things of that nature. Second one is fill rate. So this one's really obvious, but your advertising fill rate is just how much of your inventory you're actually filling over time, and just making sure that, even though you might have strong revenue coming in the door, ensuring that you're consistent on your fill rates, because as you grow your audience, that's going to become really important. Next one is advertiser ROI. And this is critical not only for you internally, but also for your external business development efforts. So we understood, when we first launched ads, we had no idea what advertiser ROI was going to be. But as we learned and as we grew and as we gathered data, we could essentially get on a call with a brand and say, look, this is how many opens you're going to get. This is the average click-through rate. If you assume this conversion rate, here's the average cost per acquisition for a customer for you. And that is exactly how they're looking at their businesses. So for us to be able to do that work for them and essentially back into a price and model that makes sense, it saved a lot of time with negotiations, and it also led to a lot more closed deals. There were several times that we ended up closing an advertising contract via a 3 email exchange or a 10-minute call. And that was because we had all this data and we were tracking it. The next one is advertiser retention. Super obvious, but just what percentage of your advertisers are repeat buyers over time? I probably would not measure this one in terms of going from 1 to 2 spots. The real measurement is after they renew for that second time, are they renewing again after that? Because a lot of times what we saw is advertisers would get a really good return on the first one, so they'd come back for a second one. And then that second one, advertising performance would just drop off because they're hitting the same people again, even if we had doubled our audience in the past, 6 months. And so the real measure for us was who's going from placement 2 or campaign 2 to campaign 3. And then the last piece for this is customer acquisition cost. And we're going to get into this in paid acquisition or in the paid subscription section, but understanding how much it costs you to acquire an actual reader, and then doing the math to understand, well, for each reader, how much ad revenue can I generate? And is that number, the lifetime value of ad revenue for that reader, higher than the amount that it cost me to, kind of acquire them? So for us, the unit economics were really, really good. Our LTV for ad revenue was, I don't know, $12 per user, something crazy like that. And our customer acquisition cost was around $1. So the math worked out. The question for us was on, mission fit with business model and advertiser retention. But you want to understand those because that's core to profitability. And we'll get into that a little bit with paid subscriptions as well. On the paid subscriber side, I'm just going to do a quick time check here. On the paid subscriber side, far and away, the first thing that matters is customer acquisition cost. There are a lot of folks who are getting paid subscribers organically, but unless you have a massive reach, that's really challenging. So the vast majority of folks who are building paid products, folks like The Athletic or Netflix or Disney Plus, they're doing paid acquisition. And what that means is they're advertising in other channels to acquire subscribers. Now, the math that you essentially need to do is how much money am I going to make from this individual subscriber over the lifetime of that subscriber? How much money did it cost me to acquire them? And then what is the ratio of those two numbers? So the customer acquisition cost is obvious. Let's say that you're advertising on Facebook and you can acquire users for $30, made up number. The second one is retention. There are a lot of external tools out there. So some folks use things like Mixpanel or Google Analytics. We do everything internally. We're just kind of wired that way. And our data structured in kind of an interesting way. So we're forced to do it offline. But understanding the retention rate down to the monthly level or whatever your payment period is really important. So we look at free to paid conversion. Ours is right around 80%. And then we look at month 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, et cetera. And that allows us to measure the lifetime value of a customer. And then the last piece is the LTV to CAC ratio. And the golden ratio in the typical like software as a service or consumer subscription industry is 3 to 1. So you want a ratio of 3x to 1 of your customer lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. Not a hard and fast rule. There's plenty of literature online about how to measure this stuff and what's good and what's bad, but greater than 1 is considered profitable. What we found is that you want to be at a minimum at 2x, but 3x plus is really the goal, and anything on top of that is really excellent. Again, the biggest point here is just you have to be able to measure your business, and if you can't measure your business, you won't be able to understand if you're profitable, how you should grow, where you should invest. And that might not be a problem when you're just getting off the ground, but as you're really trying to scale and build a business around a newsletter, it becomes critically important. So that brings me to how to scale. I've talked about this a little bit, but there's really 2 mechanisms to use. The first one is organic growth. And so I think a lot of folks leverage with great success referral programs. So you've seen, a lot of the newsletters I've mentioned, like the Hustle and like the Skim and Morning Brew and a bunch of other newsletters. They've done a really good job creating incentive programs for referrals. What we did was actually not incentivize it at all. Probably some low-hanging fruit there, but we just put a counter at the bottom of the emails that folks were getting and said, this is what your current referral count is, and here's a link to share. And I don't know if it was a psychological play or people just wanted to share the mission, but we found that 25 to 30% of our total growth was coming from organic referrals, and we did nothing to incentivize it. So organic growth, word of mouth, you can build a lot of that in and systematize it within your platform. The second piece, and this is kind of the secret sauce for all of the big email newsletters that have really ever scaled, is paid acquisition. So advertising on Facebook and Instagram and Reddit and Twitter and social channels and advertising in other newsletters. All of the biggest newsletters in the world have gotten there via paid acquisition. All the ones I've mentioned, they've all done a lot of organic referrals, and that can serve as a good leverage point. But if you really want to scale, paid acquisition is the name of the game. For free email newsletters, the reason for that is acquiring emails is really, really cheap, right? If you get your ad flow right, we've seen as low as $4 for our competitors. We've seen as low as $1 for ourselves, but it's really cheap to acquire an email newsletter subscriber. And there's kind of really well done predefined flows that a lot of other folks have publicly available, ourselves included. They kind of show the onboarding mechanism that makes the most sense. In the paid acquisition space for a paid product, it makes even more sense because your lifetime value is a lot higher. So our lifetime value was, orders of magnitude higher for paid products naturally. And that allowed us to invest even more aggressively in paid acquisition because the higher price point gave us more flexibility. So it's really that combination of organic growth and paid acquisition. You can do paid acquisition yourself if you feel comfortable with it. John, my co-founder, had just taken, the Hustle from, like I said, 200,000 to over 1 million subs. And so we had the expertise in-house. There are lots of agencies out there. It's kind of tough to vet them, but really, really important if you want to hit any meaningful scale. And again, that's something that really every major newsletter that you've seen get big has done, and not really something that folks talk about a lot.
I have a question regarding that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have, with your paid campaigns, just sending them to subscribe to the newsletter, or are you using a lead magnet of some sort in combination?
Yeah, really good question. So everything that we did was direct. We've seen what you've described with like lead magnets or kind of other mechanisms work with other brands. So for the free product, and I'm happy to share this with anybody, who'd like to follow up. What we found is that we didn't want to recreate the wheel. There was kind of a predefined flow that worked for other newsletters. And that flow was really clear-cut advertising copy. So copy, image, kind of the ad that you're putting out there in your paid acquisition channel. And then the landing page is really important. So really, really simple. Here's here's a box to put your email. Here's a red button that says sign up. Maybe the logo and a quick blurb on what it was. So for us, fact versus news in as few words as possible, delivered once a day by email. And keep it super, super, super simple. So everything that we did was direct. When we flipped to paid acquisition or to paid subscriptions, the landing page became a little bit more complicated because it was a little bit more of articulating what is the product, articulating why somebody should pay. But again, it came back to that really direct sign up flow. So customer sees ad, clicks ad, lands on landing page, immediately sees opportunities to sign up while also learning about the product.
And so then, would you say that you are now akin to something like product-led growth in the SaaS industry, where it's experiencing it for a week in like a trial?
Yeah, I think it's really tough to get folks to sign up for something like a news product without a free trial.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why, I can't think of any SaaS brand or consumer subscription company that doesn't have a free trial. So one, it's just kind of an industry standard. And two is I think it's the right thing to do. We don't want folks paying us for content that, doesn't fit with what they're looking for. So as we switch to that paid model, the landing page is still really, it's simple. It's very similar. But the onboarding flow is, hey, here's a 7-day free trial. We've made certain decisions around collecting payment information up front because we think that signals a really high intent to purchase the product. It's also really challenging to kind of convert folks who sign up for something for free with no real intention of ever paying for it And so you want to gather that intent as close to kind of upfront as possible, but even doing so, you can still offer a 7-day free trial. So I think that trial period is a really important part of any paid subscription product. And if you are a free newsletter, say that you're free. That was one really strong value proposition for us. It was solving this problem of fact-first news in as few words as possible for free. And there was, obviously a pretty high demand for that. So I'd say lean into that if you're a free product. And if not, ensure that you're offering, whatever time period makes the most sense. But for us, that was 7 days.
Thank you.
Awesome. So then the last piece is external capital. And I'll just go over this one really quickly. So we ended up raising a really small round from like angels, friends and family, a small VC fund here in Indianapolis. External capital can make a lot of sense, but it's really challenging for media companies. I think the venture capital industry is naturally a little bit skeptical of traditional content first media companies as opposed to flat platforms. Reason for that is it's really hard to create the content. The content is oftentimes really fragile. It's really challenging to scale, and retention mechanisms and retention metrics for consumer subscription brands are really, really challenging. So we ended up raising, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, is it a good fit with my mission? Am I going to have aligned incentives with the folks that I'm bringing on board? There are people that invest in media brands. There's, kind of a handful of VC funds. But the beauty of it is that if you raise, you can pour money into paid acquisition. So you don't really need that much money to build a scale of, 100,000, 500,000 free email newsletter subscribers. And that's how the big ones did it, right? They raised $500,000, $1 million, and then they took that and ran. And then it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling flywheel. So you don't really need to raise that much money, but it is a slog to do it. It is challenging to do it. You'll need to build up a base of, what looks to be a good business model and good paid acquisition beforehand. But once you do that, or external capital and venture capital funding can be kind of a good way to accelerate growth that you've already demonstrated up front. So anyways, that's hopefully the end of me talking at you. I'm happy to answer any questions on us, our story, things we've learned, things we've done. And, I'm also happy to answer, anything on tactics of what you're trying to do with your newsletter, if you want to chat through what you guys are working on or anything in between.
All right. I muted myself for a minute, so I had to request unmuting from Seth. If you want to stop your screen share, we can just kind of all talk face to face. Don't worry, people. The view that's showing up is just the speaker view on our live stream and our recording. So if you don't want to be seen, don't worry, but I would love to bring you on to ask questions if you have them for Michael. I think maybe I'm really curious about the trial experience. What is the cadence? Are you daily?
Yep, we're Monday through 4 weekdays.
Okay, and so offering that experience, like what drove the decision for that to be 7 days?
Yeah, I mean, one is, how long does somebody actually need to understand what the product feels like, right? So for a weekly newsletter, you probably need a full month. For like a Netflix, maybe you need 30 days because you need 4 sets of weekends. But for us, it's a pretty constant reminder. It's every single weekday morning you're getting this news update. And so for us, it was like, you kind of know within a week or so if you want it or not. And then the other piece was just the business model of it, right? I think that there's a natural evolution of churn within any consumer subscription business where somebody will use something for a while and then it'll kind of naturally taper off. So for us, that 7-day free trial optimized, 1, user experience, allowing people to get a feel for the product, but 2, the conversion rate. So our conversion rate is, 80% plus from free to paid. And I think that 7-day cadence as opposed to 14 or 30 or 60 or whatever it is what's allowed us to do that. So it was business model driven as well as user experience driven.
Okay. McKenna is asking and I'm making a guess here because she didn't want to come on earlier, that she wants me to ask her question for her, but shout out in the chat if that is not the case. What does your welcome email or series look like and how did you develop that?
Yeah, great question. And all of this type of customer onboarding and communication stuff is so important for retention. So for us, it's really hyper focused on reinforcing the mission. So I got to go back and I'm signed up for the new paper in 2 years. But what it essentially evolved to was your subscription makes a difference. You are part of something that's really important here. You are part of something that is bigger than just the new paper, and that is helping overcome sensationalism in the media. So that's the first thing. It's reinforcing the mission and just making them excited to feel like they're on the team, because they are. Like, we think of our users as, part of the new paper family. And we've been hyper focused on that from day one. The second piece of it is what to expect, right? So I put my credit card information in, I sign up for a free trial, or, it's a free product and I sign up. It's like, well, it's not an app that I can download right away. It's not a website I can go to. So reinforcing, well, when are you going to get the content? So, on the next weekday morning, you're going to get your first newsletter. It's going to come every morning at this time. And then the last piece is just how to manage your account or how to reach us. So you kind of want to calm any nerves. It's like, hey, have any feedback, email us here. Need to manage your account, do that here. Super easy. Here's what you're involved in. Here's what we're building towards. We're appreciative of your support. Here's what to expect. Then here's how to reach us. And honestly, the way that we learned that over time is just we get feedback from people. It's like, how do I manage my account? Or when does the new paper come? So we just started answering those questions proactively, and that led us to the flow that we have today.
So is that all in one email, or is that over a series?
Yeah, that's all in one email. We do a lot of other stuff in terms of retention over time. So that could be retention and referrals. So we used to send referral emails, to people who had subscribed within the last 30 days and opened a certain amount, just saying like, hey, we hope you're enjoying it. Here's your referral link. Here's how to share. Same thing goes for kind of re-engagement retention. So it's like, hey, we noticed you haven't opened the new paper in a while. Do you want to stay subscribed? Things of that nature. Getting user feedback, things of that nature as well. A lot of that stuff is longer tail, but for us, our whole mission is kind of taking the noise out of media. So we didn't want to send them, 3 emails of onboarding and a bunch of different email copy and, kind of spam their inboxes. So we kept it super tight, and we continue to do that today. All of our onboarding is just one single email.
Cool. I like that. We support that, by the way. Yeah. All right. So Miriam wants to know if you can talk about your tech stack regarding payments and how it works across your products, and also noted great presentation.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. I should apologize. I used to sit in an office that was conducive to Zoom, but my wife and I have a 4-month-old at home now. So home office is now a home baby room and nursery. The tech stack has been an interesting thing we've developed. So for payments processing specifically, we use Stripe. It's so interesting. This is probably more technical than you wanted in your question, but one massive issue in consumer subscription businesses is involuntary churn, where for whatever reason, a bank will decline a charge, even if the consumer wants to continue paying. So the reason that we ended up using, so we use a tool called Memberful for member management. They sit on top of Stripe. I think a lot of newsletter platforms, like the one that we're all participating in now, are starting to offer their own payment specific tools. So they're starting to do a lot of this for you, but we had to use a kind of membership management platform that would help us address involuntary churn, because Stripe is good, but their customer service has not been great in terms of that involuntary churn specifically. And it can be big, right? It can be 2, 3, 4% of your users every month, which is about it, right? 30, 40, 50% of your users that you're losing every year that want to pay you. Their bank just declines the charge. So all that said is Stripe won't necessarily address that problem for you. Stripe has also started to build out tools, but isn't necessarily where other platforms are in terms of registration management and member management. So, on top of Stripe, we use Memberful. Memberful essentially allows people to log in, manage their account, cancel their subscription, turn off auto renew, things of that nature. It makes billing super easy for us. And then it also integrates with our content management system, our email service providers. We use Campaign Monitor. And then the last piece is Stripe. The last piece is, I know you asked about the payment stack specifically, but the other thing I'll say in terms of email service providers is, just be really focused on everything from, IP designation to open rates and how those can change within platforms. We found that little things could change your email kind of inbox deliverability. And were you in Gmail promotions or Gmail primary? And those types of things were really the difference between a 30% open rate and a 50% for us. But to the specific question, tech stack for payments is all Stripe and Memberful.
Okay. John asked, is there a particular paid acquisition channel that works best for you?
Yeah, so Facebook and Instagram. We've talked to dozens of other DTC brands and found the exact same thing. I think the reason for that is just reach and maturity of ad platform. There are changes coming to that with the recent changes in Facebook and Apple tracking abilities across kind of iPhones and apps and websites. So it's a little bit TBD if that will be our horse going forward, but it's just a scale and maturity thing. Outside of that, we found supplementary channels that work. So that's Reddit, Snapchat, Twitter. We've tested a little bit on TikTok. We tried affiliate marketing, wasn't great. I think you kind of need an established brand for that. We've tried other email newsletter advertising, and that one's actually been a pretty good channel for us as well. But we're trying to build a business that addresses a problem for hundreds of millions of people. And if you want to do that, Facebook and Instagram kind of has to be your core channel.
Okay, so Dave asks, in your backgrounds, I don't remember seeing anything about like training or experience in journalism. So that might be a little surprising for people who started out a newsletter. Sorry, I'm reading.
Yeah.
I have old lady eyes. I'm leaning in awkwardly. What are your thoughts about the advantages and disadvantages of not having a journalism background?
I mean, it certainly would help, right? Both of us have like business degrees, and then I got my MBA, and like those are skills that just aren't useful to do anything besides like, slap a keyboard and pretend to be useful. And so I think it would have been nice if we had a journalism degree. What I will say is that coming into this industry, not coming from a journalism background, we didn't have a lot of learned behaviors that aren't necessarily conducive to a great media business. So while a degree in writing or background in writing would have been really useful, I think it's better that we worked at a place like LinkedIn together that was hyper-focused on user experience and building delightful consumer products first, because we could take that approach and apply it to the media industry. If we had gone and worked at a traditional media company, we would have brought all that baggage with us and not necessarily built the products that we did that scaled the way that they did. The other piece is like, look, I think a lot of the way that traditional media communicates, there's a lot of great journalism out there, but a lot of it's long form, and that's just not easy to consume. We came from a background where our entire jobs were like taking all this data and analytics and distilling it down into really easy to understand, concise things for the executive team to read and make decisions on. So our experience, while not in the news industry, was very focused on taking large amounts of data and information and condensing it down to really easy to understand kind of bite-sized nuggets of information. And that's what we do for the news. And while traditional media might be very, very good at long-form journalism, and they are, they're not necessarily as good on kind of that end of the spectrum. So our backgrounds, while not journalism specific, I think have helped us, one, because we didn't bring the baggage, but two is just, we took the approach that was required of us in our jobs before, and that's worked out really well because that's the type of people that we're kind of marketing to and writing for.
So we're having kind of a thematic afternoon. We spoke with the Daily Memphian founder earlier, and their launch, the catalyst of that was that the commercial appeal in Memphis had become like something that was served by a state news source. So people in Memphis were getting news about Knoxville. He made some great statements that journalism wasn't broken. The business model was broken, right? And you're talking a lot about that theme as well. One thing that they are doing that grew their subscriptions is their newsletters, but they have just an online newspaper, and they are charging for subscriptions, similar pricing, et cetera, but they're also selling advertisements. Do you feel like there is a hard line for a new paper to only have paid subscriptions, or are you also considering adding in sponsorships as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would, at a high level, first and foremost, agree with the sentiment that he shared, where journalism isn't broken. It's just how we consume it that is. The business model that incentivizes it. And that brings us to your question, the business model. So for the new paper specifically, we feel like there's a hard line. I think, when we converted our 100,000 newsletter subscribers, we're kind of doing that right now, into paid subs. The promise that we made was this is going to be ad free because we think ads are part of what broke this media consumption experience. A lot of the feedback we got was, hey, I don't mind the ad in your newsletter. Like, I'll pay you $5 a month, but keep it, or $10 a month, or, whatever the price point, final ends up being, keep the ads. For us, we wanted to make a conscious effort to draw that distinction and go 100% to recurring subscription revenue. One, because it's a more sustainable business model, but two, and most importantly, really focusing on alignment with mission. And we kind of got to talk the talk, right? If we think that ads are part of the core issues with traditional media, it'd be really hard for us to come out and be like, well, we're still going to sell ads, but we're just better and different at it, right? So it's a hard line for us. That doesn't necessarily mean that it can't work. The other piece I'd say is just, it's a lot of work to build an ad business, and the retention is really poor among advertisers. So you got to be really sure that it's a high ROI business model for you to build, that it's a sustainable business model for you to build, and that your incentives are always focused on the user experience. If you ever feel yourself saying, well, we have to publish more content because we need to drive ad revenue up, that is a bad conversation to have, and you need to stop yourself there. So it's possible to do. It's just really challenging. And for us, it's a hard line in the sand.
Got it. I'm not seeing new questions coming in. David did add a comment about like an empathetic, like, yes, Stripe does get weird and complicated when you have international customers. Miriam is saying brilliant, and thank you. We have a few more minutes if people want to drop in questions, or if Seth, if you have anything. I don't know. I'm trying to rack my brain on any other question I might have in this precious time that we have with you. I think what's interesting is I'm listening attentively, right? Because Curated is about to launch paid, and conversations are going on right now. Of course, it'll come out as an MVP. And this conversation alone has forced me to go like, I wonder if we should build in a workflow that is a trial that the person can set, because I don't know if there are other providers out there that are doing a trial. I haven't looked at the competitors in a while and tried to sign up for anything and been given that opportunity. I know you can like gift someone a subscription or some things like that I'm sure y'all are exploring or already have in place. But I guess the question I'm getting at, I've already asked about the length of that, but what do you feel about the trial is valuable to like the industry? Yeah.
I mean, I'd answer your question in the same way that we took the approach with the new paper, which is ask your users. So, I would just go out to the Curated folks and say, for those on the platform, if anybody's thinking about launching kind of a paid channel or paid subscriptions or whatever, first I'd start high level. So like, what are the key things that you would want to see in the product? What are the key features? And then kind of go one level, because like, you don't want to poison the well. And then I go one level deeper and say, like, do you need a free trial? Do you need involuntary churn management? Essentially automated email when somebody's credit card gets declined. Do you need member management, login, things of that nature? And you just got to talk to the folks on the platform. For us, I'd say we wouldn't use a platform that doesn't have a 7-day free trial option. But that's just one of several reasons that we chose Memberful. So I can just talk to the folks on the platform. I know it's not a great answer, but it's what we found works for us.
I love it. All right. Dave wants to go back to the topic of journalism experience. I agree with you that it's not essential, but I'm wondering how you make tough editorial decisions about what to include and how to cover it. So without journalism training, I wonder if you're thinking about those topics in an appropriately nuanced way. You have a big responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I'd kind of push back on that a little bit and say there's a lot of people with decades of experience in the journalism industry who have created a really challenging political environment in this country, purely by nature of the businesses that they've built. And so I don't think that having a journalism degree necessarily is a conduit to thinking about things in the most nuanced way possible. So that's one. Two is John and I fundamentally believe that a business will behave in a way that it's economically motivated to do so. So the way that we avoid bias slipping in and the way that we focus on the nuance of each thing starts with the promise that we make to our users. So when you see our advertisement, it's really clear: fact, burst news in as few words as possible, no bias, no clickbait, no sensationalism. When you get our first onboarding email, no bias, no clickbait, you're part of something bigger. Every step in the funnel, so much so that if we did not let those nuanced decisions slip in there, if we did let bias slip in or we're sensationalists, we would lose subscribers. We wouldn't have a business. So that's the first piece of it. The second piece is we've operationalized, kind of everything that we do and decide about the business, right? So, what I mean by that is like we have essentially taken the human component out of decision making as much as possible. There always will be a human component because we're not at a place where AI or machine learning can truly make those decisions without bias. But we built a super rigorous editorial process that would allow any writer to step in and strip out those personal biases. The last piece is a really good way to avoid kind of issues with nuance or making the right decisions. Is to read primary sources. So I'd encourage everybody who's writing any news related product. Like I've spent more time in congressional filings, court filings, the Hennepin County medical examiner's reports, 10Ks, 10Qs, everything in between, reading the primary sources, because we also live in this warped world where nobody really does that anymore. And that's the best way to not have any bias or sensationalism slip in. So kind of we've operationalized that process. It's the number one question we get from our readers and our investors. But we're motivated to do that because that's the promise we make to our readers. And if we don't, we hear about it.
So here's a good question. What does the editorial team look like right now? Is it just you and your co-founder, or has it expanded?
It's just me and John.
Okay.
We've been just trying to keep our heads above water with all the growth we've seen over the last year, but we are hiring. So shameless plug, but anybody on this call who's looking for a writing gig and, has passion for fact first news, please email me because it's our biggest need right now.
Well, you certainly can go join the Slack community where there's a newsletter jobs channel that we would love to have you participating in. Yes, David is right. That quote is gold. We will be clipping that out. See, that was one of the moments of brilliance that I was hoping that recording things would capture. So Seth dropped the link for the Slack community. I'm looking for further questions. If you have them, jot them in.
It looks like Jennifer maybe had one. She said that she's been a new paper subscriber for a while. So thank you so much. And then could you talk a little bit more about, kind of how you determine what experience your users were looking for?
Oh yeah, I missed that one. Dave's are coming just direct to me and then taking over. So all wonderful good. Catching that.
Yeah, no, all good. And Jennifer, thanks so much for the question. So yeah, I mean, I think we started with a hypothesis, and that was just based on personal frustration. And I think a lot of the best businesses in the world start with just like solving your own need. So John and I felt woefully underinformed on what was going on in the world. And we literally could not find a product that solved that need. We had 5 or 10 minutes in the morning to catch up before our Monday morning meeting or whatever team sync. And we just couldn't find something. And then we were still underinformed for the rest of the day. And the alternative to that was spending 5 hours reading the news and trying to piece through what's factual and what's not. So we started with a personal need, then we talked to people. So we talked to as many people as we could. We started like sandbox and MVP, kind of typical startup fashion. So getting minimum viable products out there, testing different types of content, testing different formatting. And then the next piece is we got an initial bucket of 10,000 readers. So we invested in getting those folks. We iterated a ton with the product. We got a ton of user feedback. We asked people what they wanted. And that combination of things of starting with personal need, iterating on MVP and just getting it out there and getting an initial bucket of customers. Like it doesn't have to be 10,000. It could have been 1,000. Allowed us to then hone in on specifically what people want. And then now we've kind of taken that funnel and grown it outward as we go. And as we've grown, where we can continue to iterate, but we have a higher base of users to kind of iterate on. But that was how we determined it. And fortunately, that's kind of stuck. And again, Jennifer, thank you so much for being a new paper subscriber.
Nice. I like hearing iteration. I think that a lot of people who build something for themselves get it to the point where it solves for them, and then they kind of forget to keep going around the circle with that audience and making sure that they are continuing to evolve in what they offer as that audience evolves.
Yeah, I mean, a really good example of that is, so our text message product, John literally started sending a text message to his friends and family with the news. Like no systems and processes, no scalable delivery channel, literally just sending text messages with news updates, and people loved it. So that was the MVP. But then we took that and people were asking for more content, more organization, better access to data. And so we started to build products on top of that. But like it was a constant series of iterations that started with something super, super simple. Like you have a newsletter idea, literally send it every day to your friends and family and the people you think would be interested and see if you want to do it. So that iteration has been important for us.
Ben asked, how on earth do you fact check all of that content between two of you plus having a baby? In awe.
but fortunately, my baby just started learning how to sleep. Although, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it. So it's not too distracting, and I have a tremendous support system here for that. But in all seriousness, I mean, we wake up really early and do it, right? Like I wake up at 3:30 or 4 a.m. Eastern every single day, and I read everything. So the first thing I do is I read across the spectrum of news. So everything on the left, everything on the right, everything in the middle, international news. We have some internal tools that we've built that help to systematize our curation across sources that we've deemed trustworthy to kind of find the correlations between them and kind of find the similarities across channels. So first thing I do is read everything, try to distill the underlying facts. Then for the fact checking piece specifically, it's just always primary sources. Like I will almost categorically refuse to publish something unless I read the primary source. That could be the statement from the congressional caucus. That could be, a statement released by a company. That could be a video. Like we just read everything. And I think it's actually, look, it does take a lot of time, right? It's hours and hours of work, and we've gotten faster over time. But the other reality is, like, if you just take the time to read a primary source, it becomes really clear what's factual and what's not. And that's not something a lot of folks do, because so much of the newsletter industry is just built on other newsletters or other news sources, where it's like, kind of this spiraling out onion that nobody's really started at the core except for that initial news publisher, and you don't really know what to trust. So biggest thing I can say is read the primary source. We spend hours doing it, and it's a really short email newsletter, but it takes hours and hours to kind of create. And that's always surprising to people. They're like, hey, it's, 8 short kind of few sentence synopses, but I don't know, there's some poet or quote or somebody somewhere said something along the lines of, I would have written this in as few words as possible, but I didn't have the time to do it. And, that's kind of the inspiration that we've taken as well, where it's a hard thing to do to condense that much information down, but we do our best to do it. And, I was already used to waking up early with my baby, so no complaints there.
All right. Well, if we don't have any further questions, we will wrap this thing up. Please go join the Slack if that is your thing. As with everything with Newsletter Fest and Curated, everything is opt-in, optional, right? If you wanted the newsletter, you got the newsletter. If you didn't, you just went straight to the landing page and signed up for the event. So we kind of follow that mentality around these parts. We believe strongly in not emailing you or reaching out or aggravating you on social media unless you have asked us to make contact. So thanks once again. We're getting lots of people adding in how awesome this was. Someone is telling you they might have someone who could work for you.
I'm going to join the Slack channel right now as a endorsement to it. So if you guys have any other questions on there or want advice on your specific use case or newsletter or nuance, please reach out. We're big supporters of the community and really excited about what everybody here is building. And Ashley and the team, that goes for you guys as well. So we're really humbled and honored to be a part of this. And just thanks so much, everybody, for the time.
Thank you. All right. That is session 4 of the day wrapped up. We'll be back in an hour with selling newsletters as a service, how you would go about using, this is a branded session. So it shows you how to go into Curated, add different users, and how you would use it in an agency model to serve multiple clients who you might be publishing newsletters for. So if you're interested in joining us for that, it's at 5. If that's not your thing, see you tomorrow. We've got a big lineup of sessions that you can find at newsletterfest.com. All right.